I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about mold. If you looked at food sensitivities, looked at the health of your gut, looking at your mental emotional stress, digging into some of these environmental toxins, if you're still not pregnant and you've made all these changes, looking at mold exposure could be a good place to start. Obviously, if you've had any kind of flooding or your house has had water damage, this is somewhere to dig into right away. We dig through what to do to help figure out if you have mold exposure, how to remediate the mold, how to heal from mold exposure, why this is important for fertility. So excited for you to listen to this episode, and feel free to leave a review on iTunes. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening to the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. And I've got a favor to ask you. If you are enjoying learning about the functional approach to fertility, consider going to iTunes and rating and reviewing the podcast. This is how it helps the show reach more people that are struggling with infertility, knowing that there's another approach that really can get to the bottom of why it's not working in the first place. So all you need to do is, if you're on the app or the desktop, just go in and consider leaving a 5-star rating and leave a review. And there is step-by-step instructions in the show notes showing you exactly how to do that. So if you can just take a few minutes, just take the few minutes right now. You can pause this recording, come back, leave the review. It would really mean the world to me and help others that are on the fertility journey as well. Take care. Hey there. I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call is for action takers, and really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FabFertile.com, and click on book a free call. One theme that keeps coming up with the couples in our FabFertile Couples Coaching Program is sleep. Whether it's insomnia, having a hard time falling asleep, waking up at night, or feeling tired when we wake up, sleep is critical for fertility and hormones. And that's why I'm so excited to have Blue Blocks as our podcast sponsor. So we're exposed to blue and green light from our phones, our tablets, our computers, indoor lights, and more. And this exposure impacts our melatonin production. And melatonin is essential for both female and male fertility. It helps determine the frequency and duration of our cycle and impacts sperm. There's lots of blue light blocking glasses on the market, but the ones from Blue Blocks, they've actually compared other popular brands, and Blue Blocks block 100% of blue and green light, while other brands fall short. So I have their sleep glasses. They have red lenses, and the ones I have are a little translucent frame, and they're so stylish and really cool. And so they eliminate 100% of the blue and green light in the 400 nanometer to 550 nanometer range. So this is the exact range that has been shown in clinical studies to disrupt melatonin and negatively impact your sleep. So all you do is wear your sleep glasses after sunset until it's time for bed, and you'll notice improved sleep after just one use. And it's also cool to use when you're flying for managing jet lag. So I got to say, I was a little skeptical about the noticing improvement after one use, but literally I use these glasses and my sleep is actually already pretty good. I used them for one day, and I have to say, after one day, I had the best sleep of my life. I just felt so rested. So these glasses, they ship free and they're tracked for all orders anywhere in the world. And also they have all their frames come in prescription, non-prescription, and reading glasses. Plus you can send in your frames and they'll add the blue light blocking and green light blocking lenses to your frame. So this is an easy hack that you can add to your fertility toolkit. All you do is go to BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com. Use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast at checkout and receive a 15% discount. That's BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com, and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast to receive your 15% discount. I didn't need to go to donor eggs. Obviously, I don't regret it. I have beautiful children. I could have done things differently, restored. I was still cycling back in my 20s. I could have looked at my health, the environmental toxins, the stress I was under.
Many women are being told their eggs are too old. That's often merely an assumption that's not based on actual evidence. The reason being that there is no direct test of egg quality. You can't test egg quality.
It's the man who's got a food sensitivity or he has a zinc deficiency.
Like there can be a root cause to these symptoms that are, quote unquote, period problems, that the doctor will pass you a pill without any question of why.
And some part of you knows that if you can reframe your journey from not want to struggle, or if it is struggle, learn how to embrace the struggle. Learn how to embrace it.
Most conditions in the child occur during the 9 months of development. It's the genetic switches are turned on or turned off, and they're pre-programmed. So you are in such a powerful, amazing position to do amazing things for your kids.
Why is IVF the first step? Because we believe it should be the last step. Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Clark, the founder of Fab Fertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today I'm welcoming back to the podcast Dr. Barter, and we're digging into mold exposure and how this can impact your fertility. Definitely check out Dr. Ann's podcast where we talk about how chiropractic care can improve fertility. And so excited that you're listening, and thank you for being here. Make sure you hit subscribe. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Dr. Barter, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're going to dig into mold. And I think for some people during the fertility journey, obviously we're looking at food sensitivities and gut infections and digging into, looking at your mental, emotional stress and your environmental stressors. But if it's still not working, it may be beneficial to dig into mold exposure. And we want to sort of take a different tact on that. And also there's some questions that we asked too, or maybe we want to look at mold first. So if you just share about your story with mold and how you came to really specialize in this.
Yeah. And you're 100% right. I really think that when you've looked at everything else and you've pared everything else down, mold is really something great to look at. But yeah, I have my own run-in with mold. And my experience is definitely different than what a lot of people present with or could present with mold. And I want to tell my story because my symptoms were much more low grade. But I was looking for a house. I was looking to move, and I found this great bungalow in Denver, like right in the heart of Denver, and it was perfect, and the price was right, and it was just too good to be true. So I moved in, and I remember at the time of moving, I just felt really overwhelmed. Like that's almost how I would describe it. A lot of anxiety, really overwhelmed, and I felt like I could just write it off to, wow, I have a lot going on. I'm completely, changing cities. Oh, wow, I've got a lot of stuff that's everywhere. And I just kept on feeling overwhelmed and anxious. So I made the move, and I just thought that it was my tendency to overcommit was why the overwhelm kept on still going. And I just kept on justifying it more. I started to realize that when I would get home from a long day of work, all I wanted to do was sit on the couch and just do nothing, or I just wanted to grab the easiest thing because I was so tired. And I remember using the term, I was blasted, was almost how I would communicate that. Just so exhausted, I'm blasted. I would just sit there, numb out, and then I would go to bed and I would sleep, but I never felt well rested when I woke up, or I would wake up multiple times during the night. Just all very strange. And about a year into living in this house, I noticed my skin really started to itch. And, the fatigue and the overwhelm symptoms continued, and my sleep kept on getting worse and worse. Then I started waking up like a vampire. My eyes were getting red. I work a lot, so I don't spend a whole lot of time at home. And I was like, wow, this is all so strange. And the windows in the house were generally open all the time. And obviously my symptoms got worse in the winter. And I went away for a weekend to go ski, and I hadn't had any motivation to leave the house. And I went away and I slept for the first time in like a year and a half. And I actually felt well rested and I felt good. And I went back home, and the house had been closed up, and I smelled it. And there it was. I smelled that musty smell, and I realized what I was dealing with at that point. And I think it just all finally came together. And, in the process of right before I found out, I weighed myself and I weighed 15 pounds more than I have ever weighed in my life. And my clothes still fit. So it was all just systemic inflammation. I remember panicking. And when I figured out what was going on, I clearly moved, right? They remediated the mold, but, it still wasn't really good enough. It was in the air vents, like it was just everywhere down in the basement. I moved and suddenly like the debilitating itching stopped. I lost 10 pounds right out of the gate a week after, and all of those symptoms just had compounded, but nobody would have thought to look at mold in that particular situation, right? Because most of the time mold is associated with respiratory issues. And it was just such a aha moment when I finally got out of there. And they're estimating something like 12 million, I think, Americans are exposed to mold and unaware of it. And I know that might not be relevant for you guys, but I mean, I think that that's a really important factor, that it's so overlooked, but yet it's so common and so many people are exposed.
Oh, totally. Yeah. The high percentage of my listeners are Americans. So hello, Americans.
Hi, Americans.
There you go. So it is interesting though, with like the skin itching, the eyes that are red, the not feeling rested, the gaining that 10 pound or 12 pounds where you didn't really know where it came from. And then lo and behold, you'd leave and then you get this well-rested sleep. And then you came back and you could smell it. Yeah. So some of those symptoms you read can be obviously common with mold exposure, but then it can also be like, oh, maybe I'm just kind of tired and I'm not motivated. But for you though, it was definitely a change. Like for you, you're like, wait a minute, like I've always, you're like a type A. So is that
right? But it was super gradual. I think that that's what was so scary about it. Like it was super gradual. I was training for a half Ironman at the time. So if I would have told somebody like I'm fatigued, they'd be like, yeah, right. You just ran, 15 miles. I was, and I was still able to perform at that high level, but I just didn't feel right. It was like something was wrong. And I'll tell you, if I probably went to somebody and spewed that out, they'd say, oh, it's probably all in your head. You're doing what? You're training for what? You're working how many hours? But it was a huge change for me. And I think you said it best, like mold is the great mimicker. I mean, a lot of my symptoms could have been chalked up to thyroid, and by the way, I was losing hair. And by the way, I started getting autoimmune markers to my thyroid in the course of living in what I call the mold mansion, which it was not a mansion at all. I just want to be clear on that. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, but I call it the mold mansion because it just softens the blow a little bit. Just looking at that and looking at potentially autoimmunity starting to flare. And yeah, I was losing hair, gaining weight, fatigued, depressed, anxious, the whole, Hashimoto's in a nutshell, and looking at those things. And I think that that's why mold is so hard to find, because it looks like so many other conditions.
Mm-hmm. And now for someone obviously on the fertility journey, why would we be need to looking at mold and considering it?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of reasons. For starters, mold is what we call a biotoxin. It's been used in biological warfare, right? And I don't think you want to try to conceive with that going on in your house, and if that's not and mold is a living tissue. So when it goes inside of your body, through inhalation or through the skin, ultimately, it still lives on and it produces it off gases, right? And it continues to make us feel terrible, right? It's just like a bacteria. And so I think just like a background of, that it's just something that's living in your system, just like a bacteria or a parasite or anything else, a fungal marker, which it is. But I think the other thing to consider is, before a baby is conceived, 4 months before, that is where the health of the baby is determined. That's when the egg and the sperm are made. And so you really want to give that baby the best genetics that you can possibly give. And so looking at that and removing potentially the mold out of your system or being out of a moldy place is really important for a couple of reasons. Number one, when a baby is in utero, they have found that if the mother is exposed to mold, the baby is much more likely to have atopic dermatitis when born. skin conditions, really uncomfortable. They've also shown in studies that the child's IQ can be affected. They've also shown that women are more likely to give birth to a lower birth rate. And then there was a really super interesting study that happened that pregnant women and their developing fetuses are more vulnerable to environmental insults. Okay. And so mold can be in food, actually. And they found that in pregnancy, that there was a correlation between mold exposure and adverse birth outcomes and or anemia for the mother. They're showing potential pregnancy loss. They were able to show that also in animal studies, low birth rate, preterm birth, growth restrictions, and overall inflammation while the mother is pregnant. So I think that those things alone should be enough. But I mean, if I haven't driven the point home enough, mold is a carcinogen. I mean, and I think it's just one of the biggest things to be careful of, because it's dangerous and it's clearly affecting the baby when, they're developing inside of the mother when they're exposed to mold. And I think it's just showing at such a large scale that happening.
Absolutely. And so now, and not to completely freak people out, but where can we, if we think there's mold in the house, so where, like there's water damaged buildings, but what are we looking for?
Yeah, I mean, mold is sneaky, right? And so I live in the dry state of Colorado, and this should be a place that quote unquote doesn't have mold, but that's actually quite untrue. I treat mold all day long, every day. From flooding. So big things, you can think of are, was your house involved with a flood? But it's much smaller scale than that. Showers that aren't properly sealed. Mold loves drywall. And so a lot of times you can't see mold. I think that that's one of the biggest things or misconceptions about mold. Oh, I don't see it, so it's not there. Well, you're generally not going to see it until it's really bad. If you can see it, you've got a problem. Right? It can be behind showers. It can be in rooms with high humidity. For example, if you go away on vacation and you live in a more humid climate, a lot of times mold spores can start to form, believe it or not. If you had a leak that has gone on for more than 24 to 48 hours, that number is debated. That can be enough of an environment to grow mold in. Let's say, your water heater explodes. If you don't find that in a relatively quickly period of time, that can be a problem. Our food can actually be contaminated with mold. So all of those places are relatively common, but a lot of people do not know they have mold. And especially if someone's bedridden or really having a hard time or continuing to lose maybe a baby, I think it's something potentially important to look at. There are tests that you can do that will test the dust to give you a really good idea if you have mold in your house, or to make a good determination. Some people will bring in remediation companies to test the air quality as well.
Yeah, just to back up here. So are we looking at, so you're obviously in Colorado, so a drier state, but if you've got that flooding or the showers that aren't sealed, the humidity, but are certain states, we're talking about the US now, obviously, but like Houston or Florida, like some of those ones?
Yes.
More, yeah.
Yeah, they're definitely predisposed. And I mean, I'm really more looking at black mold in my practice versus, other types. Mold is prevalent in the environment, right? It's all around us. It's when the indoor mold exceeds the outdoor mold when you're having a problem, right? It's all around us, but we're just looking at mold that is growing up your drywall, because you think about, drywall is a building product. Drywall is made from trees. Where does mold grow? Trees. And so a lot of those things will make it easy for mold to just grow up. And I think another common misconception is, oh, I live in new construction, so it's not a problem. I've actually seen brand new construction where someone didn't take care of a leak appropriately. Their house was riddled with mold in a relatively short amount of time. Yeah, so new construction is much tighter versus old construction that has a lot more breathability or breathing room. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a basement. You don't necessarily have to be able to see it. And if you have new construction, you may or may not be okay, depending if you've had a leak that went undiagnosed.
And if you do see it in the shower or you do see it in the windowsill, then it's there.
Yeah, there is some of that. It depends on the type. There's going to be mold in the shower. There's a little bit of mildew that is going to happen in the shower itself. And a lot of times you can wipe that off the surface pretty easily. You want to get rid of that as well. That does also release byproducts or mycotoxins in a much lower form than a full-blown mold infestation. You definitely want to get rid of that. And you want to check to make sure you don't have it going anywhere else. If you wipe it down, do you have that anywhere else? Is it growing somewhere else in your house that's contributing, or is it maybe too humid in your bathroom when you shower? Do you need to turn on a vent or crack a window to increase airflow so that it's not, the right humidity to grow mold?
So that's really the difference between mold and mildew.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So let's just circle back to some of the symptoms. And I have a list here, but you kind of experience a lot of them. So brain fog and skin rashes, digestive upset, headaches, allergy symptoms, hair loss, confusion, vertigo. Anything I'm missing?
Oh, there's a lot. Again, it's a great mimicker. But yeah, I've seen a lot of IBS symptoms tied. I've seen diabetes tied, especially late onset diabetes. I've seen type 1, believe it or not, completely drop without ever doing anything with blood glucose. I've seen their blood sugar levels get stable, a type 1 going to a type 2 without ever touching that. I've seen Hashimoto's levels stable out. I've seen thyroid completely stabilize out when it hasn't been able to be stabilized with any sort of medication if they were potentially exposed to mold. Hair loss, I've seen you can get OCD, you can get exercise intolerance. Another thing that I had that I thought was really interesting, I could never figure out why this happened to me, but I actually had a cold bum all the time. My bum was cold all the time. I don't know. But yeah, right. But that is actually, that can be poor capillaries. Ultimately, that can be oxygenation status, and that can be related to mold exposure or toxicity of some sort. Asthma, any of the coughing, the wheezing, respiratory, very linked to mold. I've seen joint pain, systemic joint pain, and fibromyalgia, very linked to mold. Drinking and peeing a lot, like you're trying to detoxify something out consistently. Ice pick pain or electrical shock pain, or when someone feels vibrations up and down their body.
So like the static.
Mood swings. I've seen skin rashes associated with it. Night sweats are another one that I thought was really quite interesting. Again, that could be associated with low dopamine. Dopamine is very affected by mold. That's one of our neurotransmitters. And that helps us with motivation or focus or being able to concentrate. In a case that I actually heard about from my neighbor, she was like, "You treat mold all the time. This is so crazy." A friend of mine, they found mold. Their children had all these behavioral problems. They were trying to put them on Adderall, etc. And, they cleaned out the mold and the child's behavioral problems stopped. Again, mold can be the great mimicker. I've gotten people off Adderall by cleaning out mold and increasing their dopamine, because of long-term mold exposure. So, I think all of those things will definitely play in mold, but it can affect any tissue in the body. And, and again, it affects the immune system. So where it shows up is completely different. I'll see 10 different patients that show up completely differently with mold.
Okay. Yeah. So it is, again, to look back to see if you have those risks of flood or water damage, showers, humidity. What else were you saying? Oh, leaks within 24 to 48 hours, then it's just been leaking and it hasn't been caught.
Right.
And contaminated food. I think we'll talk a little bit about food a little bit later. Okay. And so as far as having the mold remediated, so can you just talk about what that is and how we get rid of mold?
First thing to do is to reduce exposure. I find it very challenging to clean out mold when someone's constantly being exposed. And I level with people, you're never going to get them 100% better when they're still being exposed or living in the home. And I think the first thing is to remove the toxin, from your home, either remediate it or to move if possible. I think that's the ideal situation. After that, I will generally start with a treatment protocol. Some people I support their antioxidant status when they're living in a moldy house. And they generally tend to do okay with that, and that is pretty supportive. But at the end of the day, you really have to go through a protocol to clean out the mold from your system, especially if you're sensitive, because your body doesn't want to release all of that at once. And mold impairs detoxification across the board, right? Again, it affects it can affect every tissue. One we haven't talked about is the kidneys. Some people have debilitating kidney pain, with mold. It'll affect gut health. So all of the organs that you're trying to eliminate from can be affected, and you're not able to detox. So a lot of times people need support to be able to detox that out. But the first step, I think, is removing the mold from your environment so that you're not affected by that.
And so having someone do the remediation, not you, and even having a third party to review the home because the remediator might be potentially biased. What's your take on that?
I don't know. I think you need to probably get with a remediation company that's recommended. I've heard different stories about people having mold remediators come in. Some people get a quote and they're like, well, it's $20,000. Some people come in and they're like, oh, this is really easy. This will take us, this is half the cost of that. I mean, mold remediation can really run the gamut on that. I am not sure why. I've heard, and I'm only speaking to rumors. I've heard some companies are certified and some companies are not certified, and that runs a difference on the price gamut. And I think, it's with anything else, you go into, for example, a dentist, and one dentist tells you have a cavity and you need to get rid of it right away. The other dentist tells you they want to watch and see. I think it just is, about your level of risk and where you are on that scale, to how much you want to clean out from the mold. But I think more is definitely better. And then also looking at your belongings. If you lived in a moldy house, I think you have to really go through and clean what you can of your belongings and make sure that, some of the things that are very porous probably shouldn't be brought into maybe a new house. So I think looking at and deciding what needs to be kept and what needs to not be kept, maybe leaving some of your items into a garage in another home, and then washing them slowly just so you don't mobilize mold spores, somewhere else, because a lot of these things like to hang on. I mean, and as it relates to, for example, food, I think another common misconception on that is you have a moldy piece of bread, and people are like, I'll just take out the moldy piece of bread and eat the rest of the loaf, right? Again, it's living tissue. It's living organism.
That's what my mom used to do. Oh, I'll take this little one and I'll take that little slice off and have it. And I'm like, oh.
Oh, I've been so guilty of that. Growing up, I didn't know any better. So, I mean, I'm sure I have consumed plenty of mold in my time. We'll just peel that off. Oh, we'll just do that. But ultimately, the whole loaf of bread is affected. You have a green piece of bread, the whole loaf is affected.
And so is there a website you recommend for looking for a company to do the remediation? Anything, is it specific to where you are? I don't know if
I think it's more specific to where you are. We have a couple of recommendations on our website. We only have we have two. But I think it's just finding someone specifically where you are. One of the companies we have is a little more national, but they only work in 3 states. So, I mean, you can go on and you can check our recommended resources. We'll try to go ahead and start adding to that so that people have an idea. And then also, adding the testing, to check their house for, dust spores. And a company, where to start if you don't really feel like, hey, I need a full remediation company, or I'm really interested to know if my house has mold. There is a company called Real Time Labs, blackmoldscan.com. And both of those you can get a kit to check the dust in your home.
I know. I went there yesterday, Black Mold Scan, and it says, "Oh, we're under renovation and we're under whatever, and we're looking for." They had an email you could email them, but their site was down for some reason.
Oh shoot!
Yeah,
okay.
I was like, what?
I didn't know that. Well, hopefully they're back up, but if not, then Real Time Labs. But I'm sure they're still kicking around.
Okay, great. And then, okay, so there's different tests to see if you actually have mold. So there's the vision test by surviving mold. That's like really,
he's great.
$20 or something. It's super cheap. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that one?
I don't use it. I actually run a urine test.
Okay.
I just run a urine test. But that's a really good way to see it. That's a really good way to see if you do have mold. But I just run testing if I suspect it, just because I need to see what the levels are, and then I go from there.
Okay.
So I think the best way to determine if somebody has mold is from their history. And then if you're suspicious of that, then I just run testing. And most of the time I've been right. So actually 100% of the time I've been correct.
And which test are you using for that one then?
I use Great Plains. So I use their mycotox test.
Yep. And
to get an idea of how much mold they have in their system. And I think a couple, keynotes on that is people definitely need to be mobilizing the mold. So they need to be sweating before the test. And you also need to be dehydrated when you run the test. It's a urine test that will really help to know like what you're excreting and what's going on in your system. But yeah, generally mold detox out of somebody's system can take, I tell people it's anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. And that's what I've seen clinically in practice.
Yeah. And so as we dig into this, so this is very highly specific and customized, and obviously working with a practitioner is key. So we're just going to talk about some different suggestions that you have around this. So what are you seeing in practice as far as healing and detoxifying from mold?
I see people's pretty much everything change, from musculoskeletal aches and pains to gut issues that have been long-standing and chronic. So for example, I have a case that wasn't like a traditional mold case. I think that this case is pretty important because I think this is where most people run the gamut. A woman came in. She had lived in a moldy apartment during a time in New York, and she had severe bloating. And the bloating just would not stop, and she was having severe hair loss and anxiety. I suspected gut, right, and also mold. So I ran a stool panel, SIBO test, and mold test, and they all came up positive. So we had mold, SIBO, candida. Addressing all of those things completely stopped. Her bloating completely went away. Her hair loss completely stopped. The anxiety went to bay. And I think that shows how powerful that is. Her mold was on a much lower scale. I told her it was probably going to take about 4 months to detoxify the mold. It took 5. And then also on the yeast protocol and SIBO protocol as well. So I think that you start to see that change. But other changes that I've seen in practice have been severe musculoskeletal pain going away, severe fatigue going away. Again, Hashimoto's completely re-regulating and not being an issue anymore. And is that going to be the case for everybody? Absolutely not. Like, I'm not saying that if you have Hashimoto's, you absolutely have mold. If you treat the mold, then the Hashimoto's is going to go away. There's a lot of causes for Hashimoto's, right? Same thing for diabetes. There's a lot of toxins indicated in, this was a late onset type 1 diabetes leading to type 2 as well. Diabetes when I actually saw this patient, and all of those things re-regulated. So I think it's just powerful to show how much mold is such an endocrine disruptor and such a mimicker. And once maybe you get to the root cause, maybe the root cause of your Hashimoto's is a gut infection, or maybe it's mold or whatnot, but really getting to that root cause and not feeling like, hey, I just have to manage this. I've also seen it very well indicated in fibromyalgia cases where they don't respond to anything else. And I think once you've gone down the path with somebody, you've had X, Y, or Z complaint, Hashimoto's got issues, you name it, and it's not getting better. I think it's a really good point to look at, was I exposed to mold? And I also would say I think some people would say, oh, I've had this or nobody's looked at this. A lot of people aren't looking at mold. It's just not really taught. But I do believe it's an epidemic across the board when you really look at chronic cases, because these cases, it looks like a lot of people will be written off that it's in their head. And that's just hogwash. No one's seeking out treatment because it's in their head. They do something else with their time. I really think that most people that really want to get better are searching for care. I think it's just really a great mimicker. But you pretty much, I've seen things get better that I didn't think would get better, or in chronic cases that we're doing I think I had a case that was doing 80% better. And when we treated mold, he got to 100%, but was fine with 80%, oh, this is just how I have to live. And he's like, oh, wow, I can really feel like this. This is incredible.
Mm-hmm. And what about using sauna or?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot about that piece. Sauna is really critical. I think that sauna is a great way to detox mold. I personally use a far infrared sauna.
Mm-hmm.
I think that from the research I've done, a far infrared sauna is able to excrete about 80% toxins in the sweat. They found about 80% toxins, whereas a traditional sauna is about 40 to 50. But either way, sweating is such a great way to eliminate from your system. And I tell people to work up, because a lot of times initially people will not feel great in a sauna. I've seen the compliance with using a sauna is challenging. If somebody has to go somewhere, they generally don't sauna enough to be able to excrete the mold. I feel like it's a barrier to have to go somewhere to do something. But I think a sauna is great idea. Some people ask me, they're like, is sweating of any kind is really important in eliminating mold, and showering right after is really helpful for getting that out, because the toxins will reabsorb into your skin if you don't shower right after the fact. So yeah, I think that those two things are great. Foods, you asked me about foods.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really good to avoid contaminated foods for starters, so that you're not inoculating yourself again. There's been some research that said that a lot of grains are contaminated with mold. Coffee can be contaminated with mold. Moldy cheeses, clearly. Thinking about your blue cheese, gorgonzola cheese, like we said before, bread that is, for example, moldy. You might want to throw the whole loaf out. Some cereals can be contaminated. Some dried fruit can be contaminated, wine, grape juices, some dairy can be, and spices. So I think it's about getting a good source. An interesting article I read was also the peanuts that sit in the containers at the grocery store that you will, grind up and it comes out. Well, I've heard that those sit there too long and can also grow mold. So it's actually better to get more of a commercial made peanut butter, and then some nuts and seeds are also contaminated or can be contaminated. So I think, again, getting a good source of that is really important, making sure you're getting a good source and just making sure you're not eating old moldy food. But for the most part, I really pull people off of coffee, moldy cheeses, wine, and anything that's pretty processed.
And I've heard corn. I don't do corn, but corn can be really, really high in mold too.
Some people say that. Some people say it's a safe food.
That's interesting.
There's a lot of debate on the grain piece. So some people say, and it's hard to tell, are you getting, moldy grains by the time they get to you? Like, how are you going to know? I think it's challenging.
Yeah, so, I've heard like wheat, rice, spelt, corn. Yeah. And then using certain veggies, the cruciferous veggies like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, to help as well to support the liver with garlic and onions.
Yeah. So, that's tricky, right? So a lot of those are sulfur-based foods, and sulfur feeds yeast. So yes, is it going to support the liver? Yes, but it can also feed the yeast in the meantime. And then we've also seen a lot of times co-infections with SIBO. So I think that's really case dependent. Like what they have going on. Is that helpful? Is that not helpful? Sometimes I will give, sulfur-based glutathione, depending on the case and depending on how they respond to it. I think that's a case-by-case basis. So a lot of people will say, well, I feel like I need to eat, broccoli or garlic or whatnot, but I feel worse, So I think that's an indication probably that somebody has maybe a gut infection that they're not clearing, and they're potentially feeding the yeast. Mold and candida, they're good friends. They're always together. And so a lot of times if you're exposed to that, you probably concurrently have a gut infection with candida, if not SIBO. And that's small intestine bacterial overgrowth. That's a bacterial.
And just back to the sauna for a minute. Do you have one you recommend? You like?
So I think one of the best ones on the market is a clear light sauna, but they're very expensive. So they're pricey because they have lower EMFs. Again, I use a Therasana that is that's debated in the research with the EMFs. Some people have said, oh, it's high EMFs. Some people have said it's low EMFs. I don't really feel like there's a reliable way to measure EMFs. But the smaller the sauna you get, from my understanding, is lower EMF. So
that was Vera, VERA.
I'm sorry?
Was that the Vera? Sorry, what did you say for there?
Oh, I use the Therasana.
Oh, Thera.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And I think we were talking last time, and you were like, wait a minute, people sort of sell them on Kijiji. You can get a discount, like a good deal on some of them.
That I don't know.
No. Okay.
That I don't know. But maybe.
Well, maybe I heard you wrong. Sorry. I was like, wow, I can save some money because these things can be crazy expensive.
Oh, when we were chit-chatting afterwards last time.
Yeah.
So I know that there is a Facebook group for Clear Light Sauna. And he's one of the reps for the Clear Light Sauna. I know if you join the Facebook group, you can get a discount on that. It's like niacin detox and sauna or something along those lines. His name is Brett, and I don't recall his last name off the top, but I know that you can get a discount going through there, and I'm not really sure what that looks like or what that is, but quite a few people I think have taken him up on that. I've even seen people get Clear Light saunas off of Craigslist, brand new. So I think. Oh,
yeah, because I said maybe Kijiji. Is Kijiji just Canada?
Oh yeah, I haven't ever heard of that.
Oh, that's what. You're saying Craigslist. Yeah, so you're like Kijiji. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, so Craigslist. That's what I was meaning.
Yeah, saunas can be very, very helpful. Very, very helpful at getting toxins out for sure. There's no doubt about it.
And what about our genes? Dr. Ben Lynch is big on this with some of the SNPs that we have that impact our ability to detox mold. Anything you're seeing there?
Is he talking about methylation genes? I don't really follow him. Is he talking about methylation?
Well, yeah, like he's got the MTHFR, the DOA, and the GS. I don't know if it's a GXT or GS.
Sure. So I have seen clinically that a lot of people have trouble methylating, or they have methylation issues, which technically is the MTHFR gene, but the methylation pathway goes beyond that. So I have seen that be a problem. And so I do see that commonly. And so when you actually support that part of the detoxification, some people do better, some people don't need it. It really depends on your exposure, how sensitive you are. Some people don't have sensitivities to mold at all, right? So, and that's genetic based, right? So there's been some research that HLA-DR gene makes some people more sensitive to mold or increased sensitivity. That's why a family can live in a house and, there's 5 people and 2 people are debilitatingly sick and 3 are fine. So that comes down to, are you sensitive to mold? Again, some people can lick the wall of black mold and have no problems, although I don't recommend that. And then other people are debilitatingly sick and they've never gone down to what the black mold is. But since it's running through everything, that's since it's running through the house, through the air ducts, then hello. The other thing that I've seen with detoxification is getting the entire body right is really important because, again, mold affects the entire detoxification. And of course, being exposed to a carcinogen is going to affect your ability to detoxify, period. Wherever you have a weakness in genes, you're going to probably end up with a SNP. And the other thing that I have seen is really making sure that your gut health is good and you have the ability to detoxify, that your liver is cleaned out and you have the ability to detoxify, because a lot of times when you're cleaning this stuff out, you can see the liver enzymes rise because, again, a lot of this stuff is being filtered through and you're mobilizing it, right? So you have to be able to mobilize it, bind it up, and get it out of your system. So yeah, I do think genes are indicated in some cases more than others, depending on how much the patient has been exposed, how sensitive they are, and then other factors, like are they under stress? Like, did they just go through a serious event? I mean, all of those things are going to affect the SNPs and the genetics.
Mm-hmm. And is there any book or website or documentary on mold that you just love?
I mean, so Richie Shoemaker is great. And he has the Surviving Mold website. Mm-hmm. He's incredible. I think he's retiring soon, but yeah, he has some of the best, most updated information. He talks about how to clean out your house, how to do that. I did a podcast episode with Neil Nathan, who has a book called Toxic. I also think that that's a really great resource. It's mold and Lyme, but I really believe that his book, if you're interested in the biochemistry of mold and what it's doing in your system, it's pretty clinical. I think that that's a great book. But if you're just like, hey, I just want the gist of it, Surviving Mold is a great website.
I've heard Break the Mold is a good book too. I haven't read it though.
Oh, I haven't read that one either.
Oh. You did share some success stories. Anything else coming to mind you'd like to share?
I mean, I don't think we need to go into any more success stories unless you feel like that's relevant. Yeah, I really think that the biggest thing that I just really want to drive home is just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And I think that that's just a really important point. If you are struggling with your health and everything has come up negative and people are scratching their heads, I would really look into this and look into something looking into testing maybe your environment and figuring out if this could be a cause. And saunas are always so critical, but I have seen people's health completely transform from getting off Adderall to not having trouble with narcolepsy, to less OCD, to not having dopamine deficiencies anymore, to athletics just going through the roof. I mean, you name it, it's just been, it's been crazy. So I just really want to drive that point home. There's nothing wrong with you. You may just be exposed to environmental toxin.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom on this topic and really sharing the message. So where can listeners find you?
You can find me on my website. It is ALT, FAM, Med, MED, that's short for Alternative Family Medicine. We have a podcast called Fearless Health Podcast. And on our socials, you can find us under Alternative Family Medicine Chiropractic.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Dr. Barter.
Thank you so much.
Melatonin is important for female fertility. It helps regulate hormones and maintain the body's circadian rhythms. Plus, it helps determine the frequency and duration of the menstrual cycle. Plus, it impacts sperm count and motility. Blue and green light negatively impact our melatonin production. That's why we recommend Blue Blocks, blue and green light sleep glasses to all our one-to-one clients. Simply go to BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast at checkout to receive your 15% discount. That's BlueBlocks, BLUBLOX.com and use the coupon code GetPregnantPodcast. Hey there, I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call is for action takers, and really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FABfertile.com and click on Book a Free Call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FABfertile.com and click on Book a Free Call. The Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, including show notes and links, provides information with respect to healthy living, nutrition, lab testing, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice and always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.